The alien Empress's heat cycle needs human essence, or she'll lose it all. Aboard the Imperial cruiser Velkara's Pride, Empress Zalira sat in her chamber looking out at the stars. She had ruled for over a century, her people loyal, her enemies cautious. Yet inside her, a storm was growing. She could feel it deep in her bones, a force that was alien and dangerous. The elders had warned her long ago that her species had a rare cycle, one that could not be avoided. It came once in many lifetimes, and it demanded a special essence to survive. Without it, everything she had built would crumble. In the council room below, her advisors moved quickly. They whispered among themselves, casting worried glances toward the throne. "We need a solution," one said. "Our attempts have failed. If the cycle reaches its peak, the Empire could collapse." Another shook his head. "Humans are the only option. The archives do not lie. Only they can stabilize her." Empress Zalira did not show fear. She had faced threats from rival houses, from pirates, from the void itself. But this was different. This was her own body that betrayed her. She closed her eyes and remembered the old stories passed down from the first rulers of Velkara. Humans had once been minor players, simple and fragile. They had been overlooked, even mocked. Yet something about them had always lingered in the ancient texts. A subtle resonance, a small but powerful trait that could connect to Velkara biology. On a distant station far from Imperial eyes, Daniel Brooks lived a quiet life. He had been a fleet officer once, but years ago he left the service. Now he ran a small repair shop, fixing ships for traders who passed through. Life was slow, ordinary. He liked it that way. The universe was too big, too fast, and people often lost themselves chasing power. Here, among engines and metal, he felt safe. He did not know that the Empire had already noticed him. The moment came with no warning. His shop's airlocks opened with a loud hiss, and armored officers entered. They did not speak at first. One of them, taller than the rest, finally said, "Daniel Brooks, you are requested aboard the cruiser Velkara's Pride. Your presence is required by the Empress." Daniel blinked. I think you have the wrong person," he said, but their faces were serious. The ship's technology, even their scanners, confirmed it. There was no mistake. He tried to resist, but it was useless. He was taken aboard in silence, the officers moving efficiently. He was not chained, not harmed, yet the feeling of being swept from his home made him anxious. The cruiser was massive, larger than any vessel he had seen. Corridors stretched like rivers, lights gleaming along the walls. Everywhere he looked, he saw shapes and forms alien to him. He could sense the discipline, the weight of centuries of order, and the quiet hum of power that flowed through the ship like blood. When he was brought to the Empress, he expected a cold, unfeeling ruler. Instead, he saw someone human in her expression, almost. Her eyes were deep and calm, holding centuries of knowledge, yet also a burden he could not understand. She spoke softly, her voice carrying across the room like music. "Daniel Brooks," she said, "you are not here as a prisoner. You are here because your life may save many." He stared at her, confused. "Save what?" he asked. She looked at him with steady eyes. "My life, the life of my empire. Without you, all may be lost." He did not understand. He was a simple man, a mechanic, not a hero. Yet as she spoke, he felt a strange pull. He realized that his existence, something ordinary and unremarkable, held a meaning he had never imagined. The advisors moved around silently, taking readings, scanning, observing. The science of their species was advanced beyond human comprehension, yet this problem could not be solved with machines or technology alone. It required something living, something human. Days passed. Daniel was studied, observed, and slowly taught the rules of the imperial court. He learned the hierarchy, the dangers, the rituals. He met Laura Mitchell, a human diplomat assigned to the Empire as a liaison. She explained what little she could. "You are here because your genetics are compatible," she said. "The Empress's cycle cannot be completed with anything else. The records show that only humans have the adaptive bioresonance to stabilize her." He frowned. "Adaptive? What?" She smiled faintly. "It means your body can balance hers, without harm to either of you. It is rare. You are rare." At first, Daniel felt fear. The weight of responsibility was heavy. He was a small part of a galaxy-wide empire, and yet the empire's survival rested on him. The thought was dizzying. He could fail. If he did, countless lives, countless worlds would fall. He spent long nights walking the corridors of the cruiser, thinking of his home, wondering how a simple human like him had been chosen. Empress Zalira watched him silently. She did not speak much, but her presence was always felt. She moved through her halls with grace, even as the cycle began to affect her. There were moments when she looked tired, moments when her power flickered like a candle in the wind. Advisors whispered that the cycle had begun, and only Daniel could stabilize it. An attack came unexpectedly. A small group of rebels, hoping to weaken the Empire, infiltrated the station where Daniel had been held. Alarms rang, lights flashed red, and officers moved to contain the breach. Daniel froze at first, unsure what to do. But then he saw Empress Zalira stepping forward, calm and composed despite the chaos. She moved with authority, directing guards, stabilizing the situation. In that moment, Daniel understood the truth of her power. She was not just a ruler. She was the lifeblood of an empire. Without her, nothing held together. After the threat passed, she approached him quietly. "You will be part of this, Daniel," she said. "Not as a servant, not as a tool, as a partner, do you understand?" He nodded, though his mind raced. I think I do." She reached out, not touching him, but a small gesture of acknowledgement. It was enough. He felt a connection he could not explain, a bond that seemed to transcend species. The first part of the stabilization process began slowly. They were not alone. Scientists monitored, advisors recorded, but the real work was in presence and trust. Empress Zalira and Daniel spent hours in quiet proximity, speaking little, observing each other. Daniel learned to sense her moods, her cycles, the patterns in her behavior. She, in turn, seemed to adjust to his presence, her body and mind stabilizing incrementally. It was small, subtle, but it was working. As days turned into weeks, the Empire noticed change. Systems that had been failing began functioning again. Territories that had been rebellious sent messages of loyalty. Empress Zalira's strength returned, though she remained fragile. Daniel was no longer just a visitor. He had become essential, yet he did not forget his humanity. He worried, he hoped, he faltered. He was human, and humans were imperfect, but the Empress did not judge him for that. She seemed to value his simple honesty more than any skill or knowledge he possessed. Rumors spread quietly among the court. A human, simple and untested, was stabilizing the Empress. Some advisors whispered of fear, others of awe. If he failed, the Empire would fall. If he succeeded, humanity would gain a place in galactic history that no one could have imagined. Daniel felt the pressure, yet also a strange pride. He was ordinary in many ways, yet here he mattered in ways beyond imagination. The first part of his journey had ended. He was no longer just a man from a small repair station. He was part of a galactic story, one that would test courage, loyalty, and the quiet strength of human adaptability. And as he watched Empress Zalira walk through the corridors, steady and composed, he realized that survival sometimes did not require weapons or fleets. It required presence, trust, and the resilience of a simple human being in a universe that had never thought humans could matter. After the first stabilization sessions, Daniel began to understand more about the Empire and its people. The Velkara were not cruel, but they were distant and precise. Every action, every word had purpose. Their society had survived for thousands of years because they valued order above all else. Humans, on the other hand, were unpredictable, emotional, and small. Yet that unpredictability, that spark of life, was exactly why Daniel had been chosen. Laura Mitchell guided him through the halls of the cruiser, showing him the places where he could rest, where he could eat, and where he could observe the workings of the court. She explained that the Empress's cycle had been studied for centuries, but the process was always dangerous. Even the best of the Velkara scientists had failed to stabilize it alone. Humans, however, had the ability to adapt and resonate with alien biology in ways that machines could not. Daniel listened, still uneasy. The weight of responsibility pressed on him like a stone in his chest. "You must understand," Laura said, her voice soft but serious. "This is bigger than one life. The Empire depends on her, and she depends on you. You cannot leave. You cannot fail." Daniel nodded slowly, though he wanted to speak, to protest, to say that he was just a man. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know you feel ordinary, but you are not. You have something no one else does, and that is why you are here." Days passed in quiet routine. Daniel spent time with the Empress under careful observation. They did not speak much at first. He watched her move, her gestures precise and graceful. She watched him with eyes that seemed to see everything, yet also weighed his thoughts. Slowly, an understanding developed between them. It was not friendship, not trust in the human sense, but a connection that was necessary for survival. Presence alone had power. One evening, the Empress led Daniel to a balcony overlooking the stars. The cruiser glided silently above a glowing planet. "Humans are simple," she said quietly, "yet you have a strength that surprises me. You adapt, you endure, you matter in ways my people cannot always understand." Daniel looked out at the stars, unsure how to reply. "I don't feel strong," he said. "I'm just." Here, she turned to him, her gaze steady. "Strength is not always shown in battle or command. Sometimes it is in presence, in choice, in the will to endure. You have it." The process of stabilization began to show effects beyond the Empress's body. Court systems that had struggled with minor errors began functioning smoothly. Trade routes were more stable, and distant planets sent messages of loyalty. Advisors whispered among themselves, some fearful, some hopeful. A simple human had shifted the balance of an empire. Daniel felt both pride and fear. Every small misstep could undo everything. Every glance, every word mattered. Laura warned him about the dangers outside the ship. Rival houses had noticed the Empress's vulnerability. Spies, mercenaries, and saboteurs moved quietly across space, waiting for a chance to strike. If they learned of Daniel's role, humans could become targets. He realized that survival meant not only supporting the Empress but also protecting himself. Every step required caution. Then came a day when an incident tested everything. A signal was intercepted from a neighboring system, showing ships moving toward the cruiser. The alarm sounded, red lights flashing through the corridors. Daniel froze. He had never been in a situation like this. He wanted to run to hide, but Laura grabbed his arm. "Stay close, follow me, observe." They moved quickly through the halls, officers coordinating the defense. The Empress remained calm, her presence radiating authority. She did not shout, she did not panic. Her control over the ship was absolute. Daniel watched, understanding that true power was silent and steady. The intruders were scouts, testing defenses. The cruiser repelled them without firing weapons. The Empress's cycle, however, had caused some of the systems to falter. Daniel's presence stabilized minor fluctuations, preventing critical failures. The advisors were astonished. A human, by simply being present, had prevented disaster. The event spread quickly through the court. Whispers of fear, respect, and awe followed him wherever he went. As the days continued, Daniel grew more comfortable with the cycle, though he never fully understood it. It was subtle, a rhythm in the Empress's presence, a shift in the air around her. He learned to anticipate it, to adjust his own behavior to maintain calm. It required patience, observation, and care. The Empire had trained generations for precision, but humans brought something different. They brought adaptability, flexibility, and emotion. These were strengths the Velkara had never valued until now. Relationships in the court began to change. Some aliens resented him, seeing a human elevated to a position of importance. They whispered behind closed doors, plotting and questioning the Empress's judgment. Others were cautious, watching him carefully. Laura advised patience. "They will test you," she said, "but your role is not to win their approval. It is to support the Empress. Do not forget that." Daniel nodded, realizing the delicate balance he must maintain. One night he spoke with the Empress alone in the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them. "I don't know if I can do this," he said. She looked at him with quiet understanding. "Humans doubt themselves often," she said. "It is part of your nature, but doubt does not prevent action. It is your choices that matter, not your fears." He felt a small comfort in her words. He realized that while she relied on him, he also drew strength from her calm presence. They were bound by necessity, yet an unspoken respect grew between them. The Empress shared fragments of her history with him. She told him of wars, alliances, and betrayals. She spoke of victories and losses, of the loneliness of leadership. Daniel listened, understanding that survival was not only physical. It was political, emotional, and strategic. A ruler's life was never simple, and he began to see the weight she carried. He also saw the potential for change. A human, small and unassuming, could alter the balance of power simply by being present and engaged. Tensions grew in the empire as rival houses sensed opportunity. The Empress's cycle was a secret few knew, but whispers spread. Some demanded that Daniel be removed, fearing that human influence could destabilize centuries of tradition. Others argued that he should remain, that the Empress had survived crises before but now required something new. The Empress faced difficult decisions. Her survival and the Empire's depended on trusting a human, something unprecedented. As the first part of the cycle completed, Daniel observed a subtle shift in the Empress. She moved with more energy, her decisions were sharper, and the Empire's systems functioned better. It was clear that the human presence worked. The court could no longer deny it. Whispers turned to cautious respect. Some advisors began to approach him with questions, seeking guidance, though most remained wary. Daniel realized he was no longer just a guest. He was a participant in shaping the future of the Empire. Through all of this, Daniel never lost his humanity. He worried, he hoped, he faltered. He argued with Laura about strategy, about risk, and about fairness. He questioned the Empress on small matters, testing boundaries. She tolerated it, sometimes offering quiet corrections, sometimes leaving him to learn through experience. Their interactions were a blend of necessity and subtle mentoring. He learned patience, observation, and strategy. She learned trust, adaptability, and that humans were capable of more than the Velkhara had imagined. Toward the end of this period, a celebration was held aboard the cruiser. Minor victories were acknowledged, the crew rewarded, and the Empress appeared at her finest. Daniel stood quietly beside Laura, watching the events unfold. He felt a mix of pride and unease. He had become essential, yet he remained a human, fragile and untested in ways that still mattered. He realized that the path ahead would be full of danger, politics, and tests of loyalty. Yet for the first time, he also felt capable of meeting those challenges. The human who had once fixed ships in a quiet station now played a role that could save or doom an empire. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, had drawn him into a story far greater than he had imagined. And as he looked at the stars from the cruiser, standing near the Empress who depended on him, he understood that survival was not only about strength or technology. It was about presence, connection, and the quiet power of being human. The cycle was far from over, and dangers awaited, both seen and unseen. Yet for now, Daniel had found his place. He was learning to endure, to adapt, and to serve in a way that no human had before. The Empire watched, the stars listened, and a human quietly became the key to galactic balance. The days grew longer aboard the cruiser, and Daniel began to feel more at home in the alien world. Yet the reality of his role remained heavy. He was not a ruler, not a soldier, not a scientist. He was a human, chosen for something far beyond his understanding. And the Empress's cycle continued, pressing them both into closer contact, testing patience, trust, and endurance. Empress Zalira began to speak more with Daniel. At first, the conversations were brief and cautious, but gradually they became longer. She told him of the Empire's laws, of treaties with neighboring systems, of wars fought in the dark between planets. Daniel listened, learning the depth of her responsibilities. He asked questions, sometimes naive, sometimes sharp, and she answered with patience. He realized that leadership was not about power alone. It was about judgment, restraint, and the ability to bear the weight of others, lives without breaking. One afternoon, a message arrived from a distant colony. Rebels had taken control of a mining world on the edge of the Empire. They demanded independence and threatened the flow of essential resources. The Empress convened a council. Advisors argued, shouting over one another in rapid alien tongues. Daniel watched quietly. The situation was tense, fragile. One wrong move could escalate into a full-scale conflict. Zalira turned to him. "Humans are not usually involved in our decisions," she said, "but your perspective may help. What would you do?" Daniel hesitated. He was not a general, not a diplomat, not an advisor. Yet he had observed humanity and the Velkhara, learned patience, and seen how emotion and logic could work together. "I would try to negotiate first," he said. "Force may work, but it also creates enemies. If you can resolve this peacefully, you save lives and resources," the council murmured. Some dismissed him, but others paused, considering the human perspective. Zalira nodded. She valued his opinion not because it was human, but because it was honest. That night, Daniel walked through the corridors with Laura. "You have more influence than you realize," she said. "They may resist, they may fear you, but your presence changes things. Don't forget that." He looked down at his hands. "I still feel small. Like I don't belong here," she smiled. "Sometimes being small is an advantage. You see things they cannot. You react in ways they cannot. That is why you are here." As days passed, Daniel and the Empress grew closer in their understanding of each other. It was not friendship in a human sense, nor was it affection. It was trust, built on necessity. He began to recognize the subtle signs of her cycle, the way her energy shifted, the way her decisions became sharper or slower. He learned to anticipate these changes and adjust his own behavior, offering stability without needing to touch or interfere. His mere presence had an effect, calming her body and mind. Political tensions in the empire rose. Rival houses began plotting more openly. Spies reported movements near the cruiser, subtle threats aimed at destabilizing the Empress. She faced pressure not only from enemies outside, but also from those within, who resented a human being elevated to importance. Some advisors suggested removing him, claiming that humans could never understand Velkara politics. Others argued that the Empress's survival depended on him. An unexpected event accelerated the tension. A ship carrying a delegation from a neighboring empire arrived unannounced. Their leader, a cunning strategist named Cynthia Hayes, requested immediate audience with Zalira. The Empress agreed, but tensions were high. Cynthia was known for her sharp mind and ambition. She had studied the Empire for years, seeking weaknesses. Daniel observed silently as the delegation entered the council chamber. Cynthia's voice was calm, almost friendly, but her words were pointed. She questioned the Empire's recent stability, the sudden improvements in colony management, and the presence of humans in the court. "We are curious," she said, "how a single species once considered insignificant can influence a ruler so greatly." Daniel felt the tension rise. Whispers ran through the council. Some Velkara looked uneasy, others glared at him. Zalira remained calm, her presence steady, but he could sense the underlying stress. Zalira spoke with measured words. "Human presence is not new. History records their contribution to stabilizing certain cycles. It is not a question of power, but of necessity." Cynthia raised an eyebrow, clearly calculating. "Necessity may be true," she said, "but influence breeds ambition. What prevents humans from gaining power for themselves?" Zalira's gaze shifted briefly to Daniel. He could feel her silent command. "Remain calm, be steady." He did, standing quietly and observing the interaction. The delegation left after hours of negotiation, but the impact lingered. Whispers of fear and speculation spread through the court. Some feared that humans would demand more than their role allowed. Others considered that the empire might change, that the centuries-old traditions could be rewritten. Daniel realized that his simple presence had ripple effects far beyond the stabilization process. Every glance, every movement mattered. The Empress and Daniel spent long hours afterward discussing the incident. "They underestimate us," she said quietly, "but they also test loyalty, observe reactions. You handled yourself well." He shook his head. "I just stood there." "I didn't do anything," she smiled faintly. "Sometimes standing is enough. Presence is power in its own way. You have learned that." More challenges came quickly. Minor assassinations, sabotage attempts, and political maneuvering required the Empress to act decisively. Daniel's role grew more important. In moments of crisis, he had to remain calm, guiding her through subtle stabilizations, preventing systems from failing, and helping advisors make clear decisions. He became more than a human observer. He became an anchor, something the Empire had never relied on before. Despite the tension, small moments of quiet connection appeared. Daniel and Zalira would walk the observation decks, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. He watched her study the stars, and she watched him consider solutions to problems he did not fully understand. Their interactions were subtle, measured, yet each moment strengthened the bond required for the cycle to succeed. Rumors among the court continued. Whispers of discontent, speculation about human influence, and fear of change grew. Some Velkara began plotting against him directly. Daniel understood that danger was no longer theoretical. He could be removed or, worse, targeted. He trained quietly, observing security protocols, learning to move efficiently and anticipate risks. Every step required care, every decision had weight. One night, a small team of saboteurs infiltrated the cruiser, attempting to disrupt the systems supporting the Empress's cycle. Alarms rang, lights flashed red, and the crew mobilized quickly. Daniel remained calm. He moved through the corridors, assisting in coordination, providing guidance where he could, and ensuring the Empress remained stable. His presence alone helped prevent critical failures. The intruders were captured, but the incident sent a clear message. Not everyone accepted the human's role. Afterward, the Empress spoke to him privately. "You have saved me," she said softly. "Not with weapons, not with knowledge, but with presence. You stabilize not just my body, but the Empire itself." Daniel felt a mix of pride and fear. He was still a simple human, yet his actions had meaning on a scale he had never imagined. He realized that survival and influence did not always come from strength alone, but from steadfastness, calm, and adaptability. Weeks turned into months. Daniel learned to read the subtle cues of the Empress's body and mind. He anticipated her needs, adjusted to her moods, and became a stabilizing force beyond any technology or science the Velkara possessed. Advisors began to respect him quietly, though some still whispered their doubts. Rivals observed him closely, calculating weaknesses, yet they could not deny the results. Through all this, Daniel never lost his humanity. He worried, he made mistakes, and he questioned his place. Yet with each challenge, he grew more capable. He understood that the Empress and the Empire had chosen him not for power, not for ambition, but because humans offered something unique: adaptability, presence, and quiet resilience. The third part of his journey revealed an important truth. Survival was not only about physical strength or intelligence. It was about connection, observation, and the courage to endure. He realized that humans, underestimated and overlooked by many, had a role the galaxy could not ignore. The Empire was changing, slowly, imperceptibly. The bond between Empress and human became more than necessity. It was a subtle alliance, a foundation for the future, and a quiet promise that the galaxy's most unlikely species could shape its destiny. Daniel understood that the cycle was far from over, and greater dangers lay ahead. Yet he was ready, in his own human way, to meet them. And so, in the heart of the alien empire, a human stood quietly beside the Empress, not as a ruler, not as a weapon, but as something neither species had expected: essential, adaptable, and indispensable. The galaxy watched, though it did not yet know it, as an ordinary human began to hold extraordinary power, not through conquest, but through presence, trust, and quiet strength. The Empire was quiet on the surface, but beneath it, currents of danger moved like shadows. Rival houses plotted, spies whispered, and saboteurs lurked in the edges of territory. The Empress's cycle was reaching its critical stage, and every day brought new pressures. Daniel understood now that his role was no longer optional. He was not just present. He was essential to the survival of an entire civilization. The Empress moved through her duties with precision, but the cycle took its toll. She grew tired more easily, her concentration waned at times, and subtle errors appeared in decisions she would normally make flawlessly. Daniel noticed immediately. He adjusted his behavior, staying near her during council meetings, guiding her with quiet signals, subtle observations, and steady presence. Advisors began to notice. Some were amazed, some resentful. Humans had never been given such importance, and it unsettled centuries of tradition. One day, Laura brought him a report from intelligence. Rival factions were planning an attack on one of the Empire's key supply stations. The strike was timed to coincide with the peak of the Empress's cycle, hoping that her weakness would create chaos. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had faced small crises before, but this was different. Thousands of lives were at stake, yet he knew he could not panic. He had to remain steady, calm, and observant. "We cannot stop them all," Laura said quietly. "But we can protect the Empress and stabilize the critical points. That is what matters." Daniel nodded, understanding that his role was more than observation. It was active, though subtle. He would guide, support, and ensure the Empress remained functional. Without him, systems would falter, decisions would be delayed, and the Empire would be vulnerable. The day of the attack arrived. Alarms rang across the cruiser, red lights flashing, officers moving in coordinated response. Saboteurs infiltrated the supply station, and small skirmishes erupted. Daniel remained calm, following the Empress, adjusting her movements, ensuring she was never alone during critical decisions. His presence alone stabilized minor fluctuations in her cycle, keeping her alert and decisive. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it worked. Amid the chaos, the Empress demonstrated her power. She issued orders with clarity and precision, moving from one command to another. She did not falter, but Daniel noticed the strain in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. He stayed near, guiding her focus, reminding her with small gestures to breathe, to pause, to take in the room before acting. Without him, the pressure might have broken her. The battle ended with a surprising result. The station was defended, losses were minimized, and the Empress's authority remained intact. Advisors looked at Daniel differently now. Whispers turned to cautious respect. A human, they realized, had stabilized not only the Empress but the Empire during its greatest vulnerability. Yet danger was far from gone. Rival houses would not give up so easily. They would try again, and soon. After the crisis, the Empress and Daniel spoke privately in the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, calm after the storm. "You saved more than the station," she said quietly. "You saved my control, my strength, and the Empire's stability. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Daniel shook his head. "I just stayed close," he said. "I didn't do anything special." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "Sometimes presence is all that is required." Humans underestimate it, but it can change the course of history. Days passed, and the Empress's cycle began to stabilize further, thanks to Daniel's continued presence. Yet political tension grew. Rival factions noticed his influence and began subtle campaigns to undermine it. Rumors spread that the Empress relied too heavily on a human, that traditions were being broken, that outsiders should not hold such power. Daniel realized that he was now a political target, though he remained cautious and composed. One evening, a message arrived from a distant colony under threat. The leader requested emergency assistance, claiming that rebel forces had taken control. The Empress prepared a response, but she was weaker than usual. Daniel stayed close, guiding her, monitoring her condition, and coordinating with officers. The mission required both careful planning and rapid execution. Any misstep could result in disaster. As they approached the colony, they encountered a small fleet of rebel ships. A brief skirmish erupted, but the Empress remained calm, issuing orders with steady precision. Daniel stayed near, adjusting for fluctuations in her cycle, ensuring her focus remained sharp. The rebels were surprised by the efficiency of the response. They had expected weakness, hesitation, and chaos. Instead, they encountered coordination, discipline, and resolve. After the mission, the Empress spoke with him again. "You are more than a stabilizer," she said. "You are my anchor. Humans are simple, yet you possess something rare. Your presence changes outcomes. It is not just biology. It is will, observation, and patience." Daniel felt a mix of pride and discomfort. He had never sought power or recognition, yet here he was, shaping the fate of worlds. The court grew increasingly aware of his influence. Some advisors accepted it, others resented it. Rival houses plotted in secret, sending spies and saboteurs to test his limits. Daniel had to learn quickly, not only to support the Empress but also to navigate the dangers of politics. He learned to read gestures, anticipate threats, and maintain calm under pressure. Every decision, every movement mattered. During one particularly tense period, a saboteur infiltrated the cruiser with the intent to harm the Empress. Alarms sounded, and officers moved to intercept. Daniel recognized subtle cues before anyone else, guiding the Empress to safety, signaling officers to block paths, and preventing disaster without anyone fully realizing his actions. The saboteur was captured, and the Empress's safety was secured. Once again, his presence had changed the outcome. After the event, Laura approached him. "You are no longer just a guest," she said. "You are essential. You are part of the Empire's survival. Understand this, what you do matters on a scale most humans cannot imagine." Daniel nodded slowly. He understood now that he could never return to a quiet life. He was part of something larger, something dangerous, and something vital. The Empress's cycle reached its peak, yet she remained strong. The presence of a human, something once considered weak and insignificant, had altered the course of history. Daniel realized that humans had a unique strength, adaptability. No machine, no alien species could replace it. His patience, observation, and quiet presence had stabilized the Empress, her rule, and the Empire itself. One night, he walked with the Empress along the observation deck. The galaxy spread endlessly below, stars flickering like distant fires. "Humans are underestimated," she said softly. "Yet your kind is capable of more than we imagined. Presence, observation, and patience. These are your strengths." He looked at her, understanding for the first time the full weight of his role. He was ordinary in many ways, yet essential in ways no one could foresee. As the days passed, the Empire began to change subtly. Systems functioned more efficiently, colonies sent messages of loyalty, and rival houses hesitated. Whispers of human influence spread, but with them came respect and fear. Daniel understood that his simple presence, his humanity, had shifted centuries of tradition. He realized that influence did not always come from power, wealth, or weapons. Sometimes it came from quiet endurance, trust, and the ability to be present when it mattered most. The Empire was far from safe, yet for the first time in centuries, stability had returned. The Empress's cycle had been survived, partially because of a human who had learned to adapt, observe, and endure. Daniel had become indispensable, yet he remained humble, aware that the galaxy could still be cruel and that challenges would continue. Through it all, he never forgot his humanity. He worried, he faltered, he questioned his place, yet he persevered. He had learned that survival was not about dominance or strength alone. It was about connection, calm, and steady presence. In the heart of the alien empire, a human had become something more than anyone had imagined. A stabilizer, a guide, and a silent force that could shape the fate of worlds. And so, the fourth part of his journey ended with a fragile calm. Dangers lingered, rival factions watched, and the Empress's cycle had only been partially tamed. Yet Daniel understood his role. He was human, ordinary, yet indispensable. The galaxy would continue to test him, but he was ready to endure, adapt, and protect the Empress and the Empire. The quiet strength of one human had begun to alter the fate of an entire civilization. The Empire had survived its greatest test. The Empress's cycle was complete, and her strength had returned. The systems of the Empire functioned smoothly, colonies sent messages of loyalty, and trade routes were secure. Yet even in victory, danger lingered. Rival houses had learned of the human who had stabilized the Empress, and their ambition remained. Daniel knew that the galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and indifferent, but he also understood that his presence had changed the balance. He walked through the corridors of the cruiser, observing officers and advisors going about their duties. Their respect for him was quiet, measured, but evident. They had seen what humans could do. They had witnessed a simple man stabilize an Empress, protect a station under attack, and prevent sabotage during the peak of her cycle. Some still whispered doubts, yet even they could not deny the results. Humanity, once considered insignificant, had become essential. The Empress called him to the observation deck, where stars stretched endlessly before them. She looked steady, calm, and more powerful than ever. "You have done more than you know, Daniel," she said softly. "Your presence, your calm, your willingness to endure, it has changed the Empire. You have proven that humans are not weak and that they can hold great responsibility." He shook his head. "I just did what I could," he said. "I never thought it would matter this much," she smiled faintly. "Sometimes what matters most is what seems smallest. Your presence has become a force, never forget that." Laura joined them, and together they observed the stars. "The galaxy is watching," she said. "Others will see what you have done. They may try to challenge it, or they may accept it. Either way, humans will no longer be overlooked." Daniel felt a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. He had never sought power or recognition. He had only tried to survive, to help, to be present when it mattered. Yet now, the consequences of his simple actions spread across the Empire. Rival houses sent emissaries, some offering alliances, others threats. The Empress met with them confidently, her decisions clear and firm. She spoke of stability, peace, and cooperation, yet her words carried warning. Humans would remain part of the court, not as servants, not as tools, but as essential allies. Daniel's presence made this possible. He had become a symbol of a new era, one in which humanity, once underestimated, had a voice and a role in shaping the galaxy. Weeks passed. Minor crises appeared, as they always did, but the Empire managed them efficiently. Colonies stabilized, trade routes expanded, and the people of the Empire looked to the throne with renewed confidence. Daniel continued to stand near the Empress, guiding, observing, and stabilizing as needed. His role was quiet, yet indispensable. He had become part of the Empire's lifeblood. One evening, they received a message from a distant human colony. The leaders had heard of Daniel's role and expressed admiration and support. They sent gifts, technology, and messages of goodwill. Daniel felt a deep connection to his species, realizing that humans were capable of influence far beyond what most had imagined. The Empire, once alien and distant, now had humans woven into its future. The Empress turned to him quietly. "You have changed more than systems," she said. "You have changed hearts and minds. Humans are no longer outsiders. They are part of the Empire, and that is a new strength." He nodded slowly. "I never wanted this," he admitted. "I just wanted to survive, to help." She looked at him with steady eyes. "Sometimes survival requires courage. Sometimes helping requires presence. You have done both." Political tensions eased, though rival houses remained cautious. They had seen what humans could do and understood that underestimating them was dangerous. Whispers of fear and respect spread throughout the empire. Humans were no longer a minor species. They were essential, adaptable, and capable of stabilizing powers beyond their size or technology. Daniel realized that his species had gained influence simply through endurance, observation, and presence. The Empress held a ceremony to honor those who had contributed to the stability of the empire. She did not elevate Daniel with titles or ranks, for he wished none, but she acknowledged his role openly. The court, initially hesitant, applauded, though quietly. Humans were now recognized as essential partners. Daniel stood modestly, aware of the weight of their recognition, but still grounded in his own humanity. After the ceremony, he walked with Laura through the observation deck. "You've changed history," she said softly. "The galaxy will remember this. Humans will never be ignored again." Daniel looked at the stars, thinking of home, of the small repair station he had left behind, and of the vast universe now open to him. "I just did what was needed," he said. "If it matters, it's because the Empire needed it, not me," Laura smiled. "Sometimes being what is needed is enough to change everything." As the Empress's cycle fully ended, she moved with renewed strength and authority. The Empire stabilized, trade flowed, colonies thrived, and rival houses reconsidered their positions. Humans were no longer overlooked. Their presence mattered in ways the Velkara had never imagined. Daniel realized that survival and influence were not always about power or weapons. They were about adaptability, endurance, and the willingness to be present when it mattered most. One final test came when a fleet from a rival empire approached the cruiser. They sought to challenge the empire, testing its strength and resolve. The Empress prepared for negotiation, yet Daniel stood nearby, ready to provide stability. The negotiations were tense, yet successful. The rivals recognized the Empire's strength and the influence of humans within it. The encounter ended peacefully, though it demonstrated that vigilance remained necessary. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet for the first time in centuries, the Empire felt secure. The Empress's cycle had been survived, rival threats managed, and human presence acknowledged as essential. Daniel understood that his role, though quiet and humble, had reshaped history. He had become more than a mechanic from a small station. He was a human who had proven that adaptability, presence, and calm endurance could influence the fate of worlds. In the quiet of the observation deck, the Empress spoke once more. "Humans will be remembered," she said softly. "Their adaptability, their endurance, their ability to endure and stabilize, these are traits we will honor. You have shown them, Daniel. You have shown what humans can do." He looked at her, feeling the weight and the honor of her words. He realized that the galaxy would never forget the role of humanity in the survival of the Empire. As the stars shone outside, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He had endured, adapted, and survived. The Empress was safe, the Empire was stable, and humans had proven their worth. He knew challenges would come again, but he also knew that the quiet strength of humans, resilient, adaptable, and present, would always matter. The galaxy had learned something new, and humanity had finally taken its place among the stars. And so, the story ended not with war or conquest, but with quiet endurance, trust, and the realization that even the simplest human could become essential to the survival of worlds. Daniel had done nothing extraordinary in the eyes of ordinary life, yet in the galaxy's vast stage, his presence had changed everything. Humanity had arrived not through force, but through strength of presence, and the Empire would never forget it.